Welcome back to Ann Arbor Shield. I'm Brett Paddock from the Ann Arbor Police Department Community Engagement Unit. Appreciate you joining us today. On today's show, we cover a topic that's really gripping the nation, and certainly we see the effects here in Ann Arbor, and that is the opioid crisis. On today's show, we'll have three guests. Our first guest is a father who lost his son to this crisis, and this father has started an organization here in Washtenaw County, FAN, which is the Families Against Narcotics. Our next two guests actually work for the University of Michigan Hospital, Michigan Open, and we'll talk to Dr. Chad Brummett and Kristin Bennett from that office. Dr. Chad will talk to us about the front lines of dealing with the effects of the opioid crisis, and Kristin Bennett will talk about drug takebacks. With that, we'll go to our first clip and set the tone for our first guest, Mr. Nanos, who lost his son.
The opioid epidemic has hit home in a tragic and devastating way for me personally. On May 16th, my 21-year-old daughter, Emily, died of an overdose.
Angela Kinnicky spoke to her daughter for the last time on Mother's Day.
Go, Emily!
Go, Emily!
Emily struggled with addiction for more than a year. Angela tried to get her treatment, but says she was too late.
I got a frantic call from her dad saying, I think Emily's OD'd. You need to get over here right now. I can't even describe to you what it's like to hear those words.
Emily overdosed on the opioid fentanyl in May. Angela spoke about her daughter's fight at her funeral.
Before her addiction crushed her real self, everyone who knew her was amazed by her gregarious personality.
After a few months off, Angela returned to the news desk to share her story in hopes of saving lives.
Angela is one of the strongest women I have ever met.
News director Beth Jensen said she knew Angela's story would resonate.
And the way she told that story was so authentic. It is already making a difference. And this crusade of Angela's is now a crusade of the stations, and it's going to be in our DNA for a long time.
Welcome back. Our first guest is Mr. Mario Nanos. And Mr. Nanos, thank you again for joining me on stage and coming in today. Again, sorry for your loss. And can you tell our audience about your son, Yanni?
Yeah. Well, Yanni, just so everyone knows, for the non-Greeks watching, is John in Greek. And Yanni was 22 years old when he died last year in March 16th. And he was a AAA hockey player, a rabid Detroit Red Wings fan, part-time model, good student, an amazing guy. And he sustained injuries as a result of having played hockey to his shoulders. He left to go to school up in Mount Pleasant and was on his own because once, as you know, your kids turn 18, moms and dads don't have the same rights that they do when they turn adults. So on his own, he went and had a physician script pain meds to him. And he became addicted to those pain meds. He told several of his friends that I'm addicted to opiates, I am transitioning to heroin, and don't tell mom and dad. So his friends didn't do that. They didn't tell mom and dad. And there's a lot in between that point and when he died, but I will fast forward to not long before he died, if you want to read that text message that he sent to me a few days before he died from a heroin overdose.
We'll just read this real quick. And this is dated March 12th, 2018 at 4:11 p.m. It says, I relapsed the other day. I'm so sorry to tell you this. It breaks my heart, which is why I didn't call. I'm going to get this out of my system. I feel like I'm not done using. I left Casa this morning and I will not be returning. Other than that, I love you so much and words can't express how grateful I am for everything you've done for me on my recovery journey. Love, Yanni.
At that point, that was the worst day of my life. And by the way, this is my baby right here. That's Yanni. Like I said, 22 years old, amazing guy. And we had a pact, Officer Paddock, that if he ever needed help, if he ever thought he was going to use or relapse, that he'd call me. And he did. And we talked. Mm-hmm. And I was on the phone with him till nearly the end of his life. And I got a call a few days later from the San Diego Police Department, mm-hmm. your counterparts in Southern California, who had told me that they had found him dead in a hotel room like 200 yards from the border in Mexico. Mm. And he was alone. And the reason I appreciate you having me here is that I want to share his story, my story. I want for Dr. Brummett and Kristin to talk about what they're doing so that other families are spared what my family is going through right now.
Absolutely. So
one of the things I'm doing to try to help in that regard is I started a Families Against Narcotics chapter in Washtenaw County. And the thing I really liked about FAN, that's the acronym, mm-hmm. is that there are no silos in FAN. So when you go to a FAN meeting, you're in there with people from the University of Michigan, people from Eastern Michigan University, law enforcement, the judges from our sobriety court come to our meetings, both in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, that being Judge Pope and Judge Burke. They're mm-hmm. great guys. Mm-hmm. Come to our meetings. The pastor from the 242 church sometimes comes to our meetings. That's where our meetings are held on the second Monday of every month. And like I said, anything I can do and the team at FAN can do to educate the public and lower the stigma associated with addiction mm-hmm. is why I'm here. And when you read that text message that I got from my son, in between the lines is shame, embarrassment, stigma, and not knowing what to do next. Mm-hmm. That's what I read in between those lines. Mm-hmm. And one thing FAN tries to do is that when you're in that state of mind, you need someone next to you saying, there is hope. Right. Let me show you the way. Mm-hmm. That's what we do at Families Against Narcotics. That's kind of what you're going to hear Dr. Brummett and Kristin talking about from an educational perspective, mm-hmm. to healthcare professionals in the community and other folks in the community.
Mm-hmm. So can we talk real quick about FAN in the next meetings? And if someone wanted to go, how would they go? If someone was in crisis, do they go to these meetings? Is it just professionals, law enforcement?
No, it's not only is it professionals, white collar, blue collar, it's people in recovery, it's families of people in recovery. And some of the best advice I ever got was from a dear friend of mine who is a psychiatrist who told me when Yanni died, she encouraged me to share my story for a couple different reasons. One is that addiction impacts everybody, not just, lower socioeconomic strata, middle class, upper middle class. It hits everybody. I mean, there are healthcare professionals ODing. Mm-hmm. There are psychiatrists ODing. There are electrical engineers ODing. There are kids, young adults like Yanni ODing.
Yeah. So we talked about it's not your stereotypical person that is ODing. It is.
And the point that my psychiatrist friend was making to me is that until we start to share the human experience that is addiction, we're never going to get to the point where we talk about addiction the same way we talk about congestive heart failure and cancer and diabetes. So,
well, I appreciate you coming in and telling your story.
Yep.
Again, I'm sorry for your loss, and it's very important that you come in here.
Fan meetings?
Yes, let's talk about that
fan meetings, real quick. So we've got, I mentioned on the second Monday of every month. So our next meeting is on February 11th, Monday at 7 p.m. at the 242 Community Church. I think it's on Wagner Road.
It is.
The folks there are amazing to have given their venue to us to use. So come and join us on February 11th. And then at our next meeting in March, that's March 11th, which is again a Monday, Dr. Chad Brummett, who is on the Washtenaw Fan Board of Directors, is going to talk on the opioid epidemic. We're hoping for 200 to 300 people to come, not only people in recovery and families of people in recovery, but healthcare professionals, so psychiatrists, psychologists, MDs, DOs, nurse practitioners, nurses, a lot of different people to come and hear Dr. Brummett's incredible research that he's doing to help battle the opioid epidemic.
Great. Well, again, thanks for coming on our show today. And at the end of the show, we'll have some resources for folks that are in crisis to reach out to a variety of organizations. So again, thank you very much for coming on that show.
Me.
Thanks for telling your story.
I'm a surgeon. I prescribe a lot of opioids, and I don't know really what the implications of as a physician, writing an opioid script are for my patients. And as I started to realize that more and more, I think just became motivated to try to make a change.
I think that in recent years, there's been a lot of attention on how to understand the best prescribing practices as they relate to chronic pain, but there's been much less known about how we should prescribe after surgery, particularly in the outpatient setting.
I see the acute side of opioid management. I also see it chronically after surgery and even beyond. And what I can say is that taking care of patients who are chronically using opioids is really challenging, and getting people off opioids after they've moved down that chronic pathway is a difficult thing to do.
I think another aspect that we see in our clinics is that it's challenging once patients are dependent on opioids after surgery to try to figure out the best ways to transition them back to their PCPs and what the appropriate management is for them in the long term.
And I think that's an incredibly important point is that primary care physicians feel handcuffed at the point at which a person's come in, had surgery where they may not understand the implications of that surgery, the long-term pain aspects of that surgery. The patients have been prescribed opioids for a period of time by surgeons, and now the primary care physicians feel compelled to continue because the patient still says they have pain from that surgery, or maybe has started to take it for a different reason.
Welcome back. Our second guest speaker today is Dr. Chad Brummett from the Michigan Open at the University of Michigan Hospital. Dr. Chad, thank you for coming in today and being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us what your involvement is with Michigan Open?
Sure.
And what Michigan Open is about?
Thanks. The Michigan Opioid Prescribing Engagement Network is a collaboration between the Departments of Anesthesiology and Surgery. I'm an anesthesiologist and a pain physician. And I've partnered with two surgeons and our Institute for Healthcare Policy and Innovation to come together to think about acute care prescribing, so surgery, dentistry, and emergency medicine, these really common situations through which many people get their first opioid. And we have come together to try to focus on prevention and thinking about how to keep healthy people healthy.
So with that, where does this problem start? Where does the opioid crisis, the prescribing, over-prescribing, where's the problem with that?
The problem is longstanding. We've had a problem with opioids since the 1990s, where we saw a big uptick in prescribing, largely around chronic pain and cancer, but then spilling over into acute pain, surgery, dentistry, and it's really just reached a point where opioids were vastly overprescribed until probably 2010, 2011, where we started to see a decline. And even while we're seeing year-over-year declines, we still outpace any other country by a lot with respect to opioid prescribing. And as a pain physician, I can say with great certainty that hasn't better treated pain or better managed pain in the U.S. when compared to other countries.
So what can we do? Are we doing anything different in the U.S. As far as being problematic with overprescribing, and what is the ultimate goal?
Sure. Overprescribing, when we think about it, many people think about bad physicians or pill mills, but really the reality is that through probably misinformation and then just a lack of awareness and education, many physicians, including me, have overprescribed. I believe that I am actually part of the opioid epidemic. My well-intended care led to overprescribing because I didn't know that I was overprescribing. And we now see from surgery, in particular where most of Michigan Open's work has been focused, that patients receive anywhere from 2 to 10-fold what they actually use after surgery. And that seems crazy to people when you talk about it, but how many times, if you've had surgery, how many times have you gone back and told your surgeon how many pills you used? It just doesn't happen.
So there's a lot that are unused.
Yeah,
and that's problematic for other hands.
Correct. I mean, the story becomes more complicated when you consider that 70 to 80% of what we prescribe to people not taking opioids go unused, and then they get stored in medicine cabinets, usually unsecured, and not only become a risk for that person, but then become a risk for family members, friends, colleagues, contractors, painters, babysitters. So many people now have access to those unused pills.
So with that, with the ultimate goal of not overprescribing, are there different drugs out there that we can look at? Certainly we're going to talk in the next segment with Kristin Bennett about the drug takebacks. Is there something else that we can do, even law enforcement, that we can do to correct some of this problem?
Well, Michigan Open has created the first evidence-based prescribing recommendations for surgery that give patient-centered, so in other words, really focusing on people's care and their satisfaction, recommendations for how much opioid to write, but then done simple things. People vastly underestimate the value of things like Tylenol and ibuprofen for treating pain as a part of perioperative care, a part of surgical care. And I believe that we can eliminate exposure in many cases. We can also think about decreasing exposures, and this idea of becoming a new chronic user after a surgery, which is probably the most common complication after surgery and one we never appreciated before. So coming in, not using opioids and becoming a new chronic user is the most common complication after surgery. We believe that that is something we can eliminate. So I think that through education and guidelines, we are seeing big differences in Michigan, but we have a lot of work still to do.
What are some of the common procedures that are really the root cause of this? We talked about dentistry. How big a factor is that?
Yeah, I think dentists are particularly interesting because for many kids and young adults, that's the first exposure. And we know that those childhood exposures lead to higher likelihood of long-term dependence and abuse of opioids. And so Dentistry is one where I think we've pulled together our recommendations and looked at the evidence, we've recommended 0 pills for a person undergoing dental procedures, at least in most cases. And the reason I say that is because a Tylenol and ibuprofen, when taken regularly after dentistry procedures, are equally effective, if not better.
Than say like a Oxycontin.
Correct.
We hear that on the news all the time, that Oxycontin is always out there and is kind of like that, the lead into a really, really serious problem. Is that true?
So all the opioids have addictive potential, right? Oxycodone probably deserves its place as the bad player, but we know that all of them, including codeine and tramadol, hydrocodone, all of these have the potential for dependence and abuse.
How do you break that?
I think it's really about education, using them when they're appropriate, because actually they do have a role in some cases, but we really have to get away from our over-reliance on opioids as the primary modality, as the primary way in which we treat pain. There's many ways to treat pain, and some things we still haven't explored. But what we also know is that for many people, they're not effective in the long term, and we've vastly overutilized them, even for acute care.
Last question, how can law enforcement really do a better job in this whole model?
So I think law enforcement has come a long way. I think you heard Mario talk about the importance of decreasing stigma. We want people who are having trouble to feel comfortable coming into law enforcement. Certainly our partnership with Ann Arbor's police department helps spur the opioid drives that Kristin will talk about. And so I think that kind of partnership and community awareness and really trying to think about addiction as a disease, and I'm not a believer that we should criminalize, drug addiction and drug abuse. And I think we've tried that for a long time. And anybody who looks at it must agree that it hasn't made things better. So decreasing that stigma and treating it as a disease and helping people through these times is really where we need to be.
Great. Well, thank you for your time. I wish we had
you.
more time for you. And again, thanks for coming to the show today. And why don't we take a look at our next segment?
Thanks.
Advertising and promotion of your Take Back event are critical steps in the planning process. Your success will depend on the effort put into promoting your event. You'll want to advertise your event through social media, email blasts, flyers, and partnerships with local community organizations. Michigan Open can provide guidance on your promotion efforts. Advertising templates, as well as event signage and banner templates, are available to use the day of your Take Back event. These templates are provided upon request. With all the necessary planning steps completed, you're ready for your event. Use the day of event checklist provided in the event guide to make sure everything runs smoothly. Well-prepared volunteers are an important part of every event. Volunteers interact with community members from the time they arrive until the time they leave. For larger events, greeters welcome the participants and direct them to an available workstation for medication disposal. Volunteers at the workstations direct participants to place their medications on a tray and collect information on medications of interest if the participant consents. Once the information has been recorded, volunteers prompt participants to take their trays to the law enforcement officer who disposes of the medications. It's important to note that volunteers cannot touch the medication containers while they have pills in them, and cannot take the tray to the disposal receptacle. Participants often have questions for volunteers during their interaction. This is an opportunity to share educational materials that include information about permanent drop-off locations, as well as ways to store and dispose of medications safely. Your local partners or sponsors may also have materials you can hand out during the event. After the event, there are a few follow-up tasks the event organizer will need to accomplish. And then, with one successful Take Back event under your belt, you can begin planning the next one. For more information, including the current Take Back Event Management Guide, visit michiganopen.org.
Welcome back to Ann Arbor Shield. We're here with our last guest, Kristin Bennett from Michigan Open. Kristin, thank you for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell us about the drug takebacks? You are pretty much in charge of them, right? And
For sure.
setting them up locally.
Yeah, for Washtenaw County, we actually started them in 2015. So this spring, when we host our event, it will be our 9th event. Wow. We have one both in the spring and in the fall. They're usually on a Saturday, midday, 10 to 2. And the past couple of times, we've held them right at St. Francis in the parking lot there on Stadium. Yeah.
And what are some of the rules that someone might need to know as if they have extra prescription drugs that they need to get rid of? What can they bring? What can't they bring? Sharps?
For sure. A general rule is just any form of pill and capsule we will take. Otherwise, we do have a telephone number you can call just to get clarification in regards to patches, inhalers, and such. And when you do come to the event, then just bring everything that you want to get rid of, and then we will go ahead and go through it. And we do have representatives from Washtenaw County who will go ahead and collect the sharps as well farther on down. It takes usually, just depending on how many medications that you do bring back, need to be one pill or a couple bags if someone's had surgery, or if there's been a sickness in your family and you have a large amount. It usually just takes between like 1 and 5 minutes just to go through everything.
So pretty quick.
Yeah, pretty quick.
So myself being a part of it a couple times actually now, there's a lot of staff there. So there's a lot of support, and where are those folks from?
For sure. We have a great team at Michigan Open and in the Department of Anesthesiology. We just love giving back to the community. We love working with you. We just appreciate, what Ann Arbor Police, that, you're allowing us to do this with you.
Great. And I understand we have a take back coming up shortly.
We do. Saturday, April 27th. And again, it's at St. Francis Elementary School.
Great.
So.
Great. Well, I appreciate you coming on to the show today. And again, Dr. Chad Brummett's going to be there probably at the next Take Back too.
For sure. Yes, he will.
And we'll see Kristin there as well, and you'll probably see myself as well. So again, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Ann Arbor Shield. And as you can see on the screen, we have some resources for anybody that's in crisis, or if you know someone that is in crisis, please make the call. We have a ton of resources that can help you out. With that, I want to thank all our guests for joining us on the show today. And I want to thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Ann Arbor Shield. Thank you.